So we've come to our first keynote lecture for this conference. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Larry Culliford. And Dr. Culliford he was a consultant psychiatrist working in Brighton, now retired. He told me that he retired in order to focus on writing. And I'm sure we all benefit from that. There's a mini bookshop at the back, so you'll be able to see his books and hopefully buy some. I picked one up here, Little Book of Happiness. I think it augurs well.
Thank you.
Not only that, but we're moving towards paradise as well, I see. So the paradigm pointing to paradise. So Dr. Culliford was a founding member of the special interest group in psychiatry and spirituality, and I know that our section here in this conference, we've had some contact with that group before. It's a very influential group, and to your credit that you were in the founding, I think it was part of the committee for 10 years, so you're very influential. I'm very pleased to welcome you here, and I'm looking forward to what you have to say for us.
Thank you, Les. Well, after Tony's whoosh, I hope to take you in an orderly manner through a set of ideas based on what I'm calling a new paradigm of a psycho-spiritual or holistic paradigm. Before I get started, I want to mention some connections that arose in those of us who were staying at the pub, the Blacksmith's Arms, last evening. Firstly, the word bass comes to mind, not just because of the beer we were drinking and the fish we were eating, but because if you haven't heard of BASS, it's the British Association for the Study of Spirituality. It's a relatively new organisation, and they've just produced the first volume of their journal, the Journal for the Study of Spirituality. And I don't want to spend much more time plugging it, but I'm sure that most of you here would be interested to find out about the activities of that organisation, which is multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, and they organised a wonderful conference last year and have another conference coming up next year, which I recommend. The other reason for mentioning the journal is that Ingrid Slack, who was kind enough to invite me to be your keynote speaker, has actually published a review of my book, which I'm going to be using as my basic text for this talk. And I've printed up copies of the review by the bookshop. And I'm very, very grateful to Ingrid for inviting me and to the committee, because for me, as a psychiatrist, it's a remarkable privilege and pleasure and joy, really, to be amongst you for this conference. I knew David fairly well. I'm sorry the picture's a bit blurry. But I really dedicate this talk to him and to his memory. There's a sense in which, as a psychiatrist, I feel as if I belong to a different tribe. And I'm going to mention tribes a little bit in the talk, tribes and tribalism. A couple of other things from the title of the conference, Memories, Dreams and Reflections. I was going to just say that I had some very good memories of some excellent conversations with David and some talks that I attended that he gave. And going back to the Blacksmith's Arms, we were discussing dreams last evening. I think Chris was talking about a study he was involved in doing dreams. Well, I'd perhaps like to begin by just sharing one of my dreams with you. I'm remembering a dream that I had many, many years ago. I was in the dream walking in what you might call an apocalyptic landscape, a landscape very dull in colour, grey, dark clouds, mud or compacted ash and rivulets and streams running through it, and the whole thing barren, except that I could see one or two other figures in the far distance strolling around, and apparently as lost as I was, until I became aware that I had over my shoulder a shoulder bag of some kind, and in my hand I had a prospector's pickaxe, a short-handled pick. And as I walked along a bit further nearer to a stream, I noticed something glittering, and it was really a beautiful ingot of gold, as if some gold had been molten and had then solidified in a beautiful shape. And I was able with the pick to simply tap away and dislodge this ingot, which I was then able to put in my bag, and I could then move on, and there was another, and then another, and I had 2 or 3 in my bag when I stopped with a tremendous dilemma. Was I going to go on collecting ingots, or was I going to go and tell people about them? I had in the dream the idea that particularly for some reason, my mother and brother were nearby in a town nearby, and I felt I should go and tell them about it and encourage them to come and get the gold for themselves. And the dream ended really with me in this dilemma. Was I going to go on picking up the treasure, or rush off to tell people about it? Well, here I am many years later, hoping to be sharing with you the kind of treasure that I have come to recognize that is given us when we connect with natural wisdom. I think of wisdom as a kind of knowledge, a kind of sacred knowledge, as opposed to a kind of more material knowledge, as the knowledge of how to be and how to behave, rather than the knowledge of things and how they work. And so I'm hoping to be able to share some of this wisdom. This is the reflections part with you today, and together with this great wealth that I think that we are able to tap into using the what I like to call spiritual awareness of our minds, is not just wisdom, but love and compassion too. These great treasures of wisdom, love and compassion and joy and others too, which I'll be making mention of. And another part of the events at the Blacksmith's Arms, actually the first thing was that I walked into the bar area at the Blacksmith's Arms last evening, and there was Eric, deep in study of reading through my book. It's a wonderful thing for an author to go into a strange place and find somebody reading his book. Fantastic. But I hope I have been criticized for overdoing the commercial bit. But there you are. Okay. Well, we're talking about a new paradigm, a psycho-spiritual paradigm. And I'm sure you know what a paradigm is, but I thought I might just read this part anyway. A paradigm is a way of seeing or construing the world which underlies the theories, operating principles, rules, and methodologies of science during a particular period of history. Such a model incorporates values, assumptions, and beliefs accepted by the scientific community and by those engaged in applying science, such as in the fields of health and social care. A paradigm shift involves a major conceptual change in both theory and practice. It is necessarily a development or extension of what has gone before. So I'm about to try and convey in a relatively short time this new holistic or psycho-spiritual paradigm. So what are the holistic aspects? It's wholeness, and I refer to both and thinking in contrast to either or, right or wrong, and indeed us and them, a kind of mentality. It's universal. It embraces the entire life cycle. The principle of reciprocity is that there are consequences for your thoughts, words, and actions, and there's an emphasis on healing of people rather than the removal of symptoms or suppression of symptoms. And I use that because the paradigm, as I have approached writing it, is useful, particularly in the context of healthcare and mental health care, social care, but is equally now being picked up or in other ways being developed in other areas of life, particularly education, but also at the BASS, the BAS conference, there were people from commerce and banking and even politics. So spirituality has no boundaries. It I would say, is relevant in all walks of life. But for professional carers, health carers, it speaks to optimizing patient care, and there are various personal and vocational aspects, which to some extent, as you know from your program, I'll be giving a workshop tomorrow on spiritual skills and spiritual practices, and to some extent we'll maybe be able to focus on that aspect, the vocational aspects, tomorrow. These are some of the names that have already been mentioned. Desjardins, William James, obviously. I'm probably putting them here for completeness, rather than to spend any particular time talking about them. But I think Tony mentioned, had a nice quote from Desjardins earlier on. More recent antecedents, well, the reason for putting Piaget, Erickson and Kohlberg in are that James Fowler uses the synthesis of the thoughts of those three. How many of you are familiar with James Fowler's and his 6 stages of faith? Not very many. Well, that's in a way good for me, because it means that you won't have heard a lot of what I'm going to say, which is very heavily based on developments of Fowler. And I wanted to mention David as well, and John Swinton and Victor Schirmer, whose these 3 books, James Fowler's book and David's and Victor's. I didn't have a photo of John's book, but so James Fowler wrote The Stages of Faith, The Psychology of Human Development and the Quest for Meaning, published in 1981. He gave the 6 stages quite complex names, and I've basically renamed them. But before I say that, I wanted to, I just looked at what my next slide is, and I realized that I've forgotten to say that it's in dealing with spirituality, I've found it best that it shouldn't be considered so much as an object or specimen to analyze, much more as an adventure playground or theme park to explore, much more of an experiential approach, and a deeply personal one. Spirituality is sometimes said to be where the deeply personal meets the universal. Going back to the formation of the special interest group within the Royal College of Psychiatrists, this was back in about 1998-99. At first we were a bit frightened of calling it a spirituality group. The word seemed at that time to awaken hostility. Well, that's what we thought. Well, actually, it hasn't done. In order to establish such a special interest group, you need 120 college members to sign up. Well, we had those 120 names within a week. And now, after 10 years, there are over 5,000, or I think it's 5,500, college members who are also members of the special interest group. So it's about getting close towards a third of the college are members of the special interest group. And we think it's the younger people, because what happens when you join the college, is you're sent a list of the special interest groups, and you indicate which ones you want to join. But what did we think was our job or function? What was the purpose? At first we thought we would be a cosy little group who got together and discussed these matters that were of interest to us. But we were increasingly asked to contribute to college publications and so on. And so we found ourselves developing a language of spirituality. And this is... to take a point that you raised earlier, it's deliberately non-denominational. It deliberately doesn't refer to any particular religious tradition, and so as to be unifying and avoid controversy. So we discuss particularly spiritual awareness, spiritual values, spiritual skills, and spiritual practices, as I will be doing, if time permits, in the course of this talk, and if not, partly tomorrow as well. I've already given you the background about my book. So I want to say now something about dimensions of human experience. It seems necessary to me to be very clear in one's thinking about the possibility of dividing human experience into the experience at a physical level. That's to say, atoms and molecules and energy, physics and chemistry, then the biological level, the personal psychological level, and the social psychological level, and the spiritual level. And as you see, I've given the same 5 dimensions 3 ways of being conceived. One is a hierarchy with sort of complexity and oh yes, I've got one here. I've got a little pointer here. Thank you. And oh. Now what have I done? I pressed the wrong thing.
That's great. Thank you. It's just right.
Oh, I got it. You've done that. Okay, well, I want to go to the next one now. This one. Okay, so something circular, so that they are involved with each other, and then the third way with spirituality. Can we go to the next slide now? Oh, can we? That's it. Let's go back to normal. That's fine. Okay. So you've all been given a copy of the handouts in your packs. So I'll let you, although they're rather small and hard to read, I have to submit. You'll have to. It's worth, I think, reflecting on these 5 distinctions, because it gets you out of a great deal of trouble. I had listened to people arguing about issues very frequently that seemed to me to be that people are trying to argue from a biological perspective when and trying to fit everything into a biological perspective. Evolutionary theorists, for instance, try to fit everything into an evolutionary theory, which is actually a biological theory. It's a very good biological theory, but it's not necessarily a very good psychological or social theory. So I'll have to move on, although that's, again, quite a big topic that I would like the opportunity to spend more time discussing. So here we have my version of Fowler's stages of spiritual development. The first 2 are childhood stages. Actually, he has a 7th, which is before consciousness, in the sort of pre-infant stage. But not very much, we don't know very much about that, and a theory is that not a huge amount goes on. But the egocentric stage is very young children, and the conditioning stage is when more school-age children. The whole question of childhood spirituality is fascinating to me, and I have written a chapter about it. But I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to spend a great deal of time talking about it now, because I'm going to concentrate on the adult stages of conformist, individual, and integration, and then finally the universal stage of teaching and healing. I will just say that no, I'll come back to childhood in a moment. I've got a diagram that I'll make reference to. Will make it easier to explain. Now, so just saying a little bit about the three stages, 3, 4, and 5. The conformist stage is a stage at which people want to belong and feel secure as part of a group. And the stage 4, the individual stage, is when they want to think, a person wants to think and speak and act independently for him or herself. And these are really competing drives. If you want to belong, then you obviously, in a very rigid tribe or hierarchy or group structure, you obviously don't want to be seen to think, speak, and act independently. And as well as competing drives, you find competing values, competing sets of values. And I've just characterized them as worldly and spiritual. Material, mercenary, competitive, shifting, opportunistic, expedient, divisive, self-seeking, secular. I don't know if that rings any bells. As against something some values which are non-material, enduring, compassionate, discerning, truthful, selfless, patient, and wise. Now, economists will tell you that we need worldly values to have a materially comfortable lifestyle, and I'm not disagreeing. And I'm not saying that, like in Animal Farm, spiritual good, worldly bad. What I'm saying is that these are competing sets of values that often people suffer when the competition is dominated by those values, the worldly values, and it's better that people seek to fulfill their worldly aims and so on under the guidance of a kind of a spiritual level of discernment and understanding. So in other words, it's a question of, to put it very simply, that in a culture where worldly values dominate spiritual values, it's less functional than when the reverse is the case. So why is that? Well, what worldly values seem to do is to promote emotions associated with attachment, threat, and loss. And I've characterized this set of emotions as a fairly comprehensive basic set. It doesn't exactly fit with other people. I know other authorities have written about the basic human emotions, but I kind of got this group because it seems to work with me to fit the idea that kind of a Buddhist idea that suffering begins with desire and aversion, of wanting things and not wanting things. And of course these things go together, because if you want it to be sunny, then you also don't want it to be raining. And every desire can be couched in either the positive or negative frame. But if you have what you desire, then immediately it sets up the anxiety that you may lose it, and a degree of bewilderment when it's under threat, and doubt too. And the attachments, and I'm kind of sure you already know this, but it's worth me just pointing it out. The attachments are to anything: a person, a place, an object, something like wealth or celebrity, an idea, an ideology. And this is our life, isn't it? We're all forever being attached to something, and our attachments are under threat. And then when we feel that they're under severe threat and we begin to lose them, we grow angry. Anger, I think, is something about resisting threat. When we lose something we have valued, we feel some shame and possibly an element of guilt. And finally, when the loss can no longer be denied, it's a reality that we can't prevent any further, that's when the grieving of sadness comes. And the importance of this is that sadness, as I understand it, heralds healing. If you stay angry, you don't heal. If you stay, if you stay in states of bewilderment and doubt and so on, it's still to do with holding on to your attachment. So what happens when a person lets go of that which they prized? The sadness heralds the relief and release of energy, the catharsis with tears and so on. And each of these finds its complement. So desire is met with contentment. Anxiety, bewilderment, and doubt meet with calmness and clarity and a sense of confidence. Anger, shame, and guilt with acceptance, which is another way of describing non-anger. Our language lets us down sometimes. Esteem against shame, and innocence against guilt. And sadness develops into joy. And what I've written about more in one of the other books you'll see at the back, Happiness, the 30-Day Guide, is the idea that emotional healing involves this kind of switch from the painful emotions to the more pleasurable, if you like, the less painful set of emotions. And that there is a kind of quantum adjustment with full acceptance of loss, which results in not just healing but also growth, some kind of personal growth. And this comes in when we're talking, as I will be in a moment, about moving from one faith stage, one stage of spiritual development to the next. It requires, to some degree, if not to a great degree, a shift from resisting loss to accepting it, from those painful emotions to the happier ones. So once the shift occurs, like a leaf doesn't go back ever up to the tree, a person who's been through and resolved a great loss, a period of adversity, will find themselves living a more spontaneous life, a less fearful life, and a more spiritually mature life. And that's what the value of adversity is, essentially speaking. I mean, I think one of the issues with our culture, you might say, one comment one can make about it is that it doesn't value adversity. Everybody seeks to avoid it. And yet, in fact, without it, there is no growth. You cannot grow spiritually without, or as a personality, you could say. Now, what am I talking about, spiritual growth and spiritual development? Well, I'm just showing you this diagram, which is taken from my book, but I've got a slightly bigger version of it. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through it, and it may look a bit complicated, but I don't think it is very. So what we have here are the stages of faith development. The egocentric, there's infancy, that doesn't count as a stage. The egocentric and conditioning stage is relatively early in life. Then stages 3, 4, and 5, and then stage 6. And what you'll notice is that there's something along the bottom called the spiritual self, and on this axis, the everyday ego. And the distance under the arc is something called the level of dissonance. And in the life cycle, this is a term that Victor Shermer uses, borrowed from Donald Winnicott, that the child is born with a pristine ego, which is a rather nice phrase. And Shermer goes on to say that this is something like a forerunner of the spiritual self. I just say that the term spiritual self, higher self, true self, these are expressions that are a bit interchangeable. And so there is this split from very early on between according to this paradigm anyway, between what we call the everyday ego, the everyday consciousness of self, of personhood, and the something else which is called the spiritual self, which we'll work towards understanding as we go through. And this diagram also shows that people travel on different trajectories, for the sake of argument, low, medium, and high, so that people whose lives are relatively spiritually mature from start to finish, born saints, their everyday ego and their spiritual self aren't as much out of dissonance as people who live much more troubled lives and perhaps one might say more materialistic lives and atheistic and secular lives. I just had a little demonstration. I need to borrow you, Les. Could you just hold this and turn to face the audience and stretch it a bit? Okay, well, it's like this. This is just to give you a visual image. It's like this. Here's the unmoving, untroubled spiritual self. It's according to this paradigm within us, each of us. And life does that. In other words, you go eccentric. And there are forces bringing it back in harmony, but there are also other forces at different times. Any attachment and loss will bring it off center. Okay, that's great. It's a very simple demonstration. But hopefully... Thank you. Thank you, Liz. It's a very simple demonstration, but hopefully it gives you the idea that there is a force, a spiritual force, if you like, which is trying to restore us to this calm, pristine state. And any theoretical understanding of human psychology probably needs to contain a spiritual dimension and some reference to this type of way of understanding our journeys through life. So I've said that the conformist stage is you feel safer in if you belong to a group. And in fact, belonging to a group masks the dissonance between what's going on in your everyday life and the split away from the inner peace, the inner calm and tranquility and wisdom of the spiritual self. One thing about Les's wonderful demonstration, of course, I forgot to say, and it reflects a little bit back to Tony's talk, is that we aren't little strings. This is string theory. We aren't strings in isolation. We're all strings, and we're all vibrating, and our vibrations are interacting with each other. And nature is vibrating, and Gaia is vibrating, and the cosmos is vibrating, and all of these influences are related. So one way of understanding what the spiritual self is about is, and the word soul is also used for that, that it is a communicating principle between the deepest personal level of the individual and the spiritual unity that is sometimes referred to by your word, God, sometimes referred to Brahman, if you like, sometimes referred to as simply the absolute, or the totality, or sometimes because it is an ineffable concept, not referred to at all. Or the Holy Spirit is an equally useful term. So you can say that the soul is in communication with the overarching spirit, the spirit of the universe, the spirit of nature, the spirit of each individual human. And people at different times are more or less aware of, and more or less you could say obedient to, or submissive to the communications between the soul, the spiritual self, and the overarching totality. And it occurred to me to say that part of what some researchers into children's spirituality have found is that most children have this kind of, what David Hay and Rebecca Nye in their wonderful book, The Spirit of the Child, call relational consciousness. I would call it spiritual awareness, but they call it relational consciousness because they want to talk about the relation between the child's awareness of the relationship between him or herself and other people, particularly in young children, obviously parents, their relation with nature, and their relation with God or some kind of reality that they can barely describe and seldom have an adequate language for, but which the researchers, as it were, somehow coax or interpret for them. And so youngish children, quite young children, have this very strong relational consciousness or spiritual awareness. By the ages of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, it's, as it were, atrophied because it's not encouraged, because it's actually actively discouraged or suppressed, because children aren't given adequate experiences or language, and in fact learn quite quickly to shut up when they start talking about God or heaven or Jesus or other specifically denominational type language, partly because it upsets people who are heavily into this conformist stage, because you don't want to draw attention to yourself, you don't want to feel threatened by the idea that you may in some way be different, or your child may be different. And we're now in a strongly secular a culture based on a strongly secular worldview, science-based. I use that in quotes, science, because scientia and sapientia have, in my view, to go together, science and wisdom. But science, the kind of science that is evidence-based, it seems, there's no evidence for God, so he can't exist, and so on. So on. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so children lose their spiritual awareness, and so if I say we lose our spiritual awareness, on the whole, and people around us do, so that by the time you're a young adult, is what you might be in this stage. I mean, some people never go beyond these earlier stages, and that's a whole other story, another couple of chapters. Dictators are often egocentrics, and their followers are often stuck in this stage. But that's another, as I say, that's another chapter. So the majority, according to Fowler's survey and study, he studied several hundred people, or he and his team. The majority of people get no further than stage 3, and the next group, largest group, are somewhere into stage 4 or between the two. Relatively few get into stage 5 or even between 4 and 5. And he only found one person that he deemed to be in stage 6. The other people he deemed to be in stage 6 were people like the Christian monk and writer Thomas Merton, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Dag Hammarskjöld, and I can't think of any others that he mentions. But I've found another one from history in here, a Dutch victim of the Nazi persecution called Etty Hilsum. And if there's time, I might be able to say a bit more about her. But I want to stick with I beg your pardon. Stick with this diagram a bit longer and say that a little bit more about. Pressing the wrong button. A little bit more about what happens to get you out of here and into here. Well, for some people it just happens, but for other people, it quote, something happens. And I made up a story for the books to illustrate this in the book. And the story is of a tribe who live in a valley where there's perpetual cloud cover. And for the sun literally never shines through. And yet one young man and his friend go up to the top of a mountain one day, and they break up above the clouds, and they see the sunlight, and they think, this is new, nobody's ever told us about this is fantastic. And so they go back down and try and persuade the tribal elders and so on that they must, investigate this and just go beyond their valley and look further and look elsewhere. And they're basically told, keep quiet, you'll upset people, shut up. So the chap tries to persuade his friend to come with him, and they set off, but the friend gets fearful and goes back down, and the tribe hail the one who goes back as a hero, and much later on he becomes the chief of the tribe. But the one who goes on alone eventually gets up over the mountain passes and into the next valley and down, and eventually comes out onto the plain, and the sun's shining all the time, and the people are happy, and the crops all grow much better, and they wear colourful clothes, and they're cheerful, and they welcome him, and he loves it there, and he joins a family and so on. But after a bit, he thinks to himself, I've got to go back and tell my people. I've got to go back, because they really got to know about this. So he goes back, and very briefly, it doesn't work. He argues with them, and eventually, he has to go through a kind of grieving, because he realizes that he has to leave again to go and live in the sunshine, but he's going to lose his family and all his friends and so on, and give up his original culture and join another one. And so it's a story of how lonely it is to go from here to becoming an individual. You can actually, really be mistreated by your original group if they have strict rules, and you can waste an awful lot of time trying to go back and try and actually convert them back to your new way of thinking. So what are you supposed to do? I mean, other people in this stage, they give up their last group, but they go and try and find a new group. I've given up the Catholics. I'm going to join the Quakers. I'm going to be a Buddhist. But actually, all groups ultimately have the same problems with them. They are exclusive. It is us and them. And that's when you eventually start to recognize a kind of universality of humanity, and you begin to get into stage 5 and join I've got what I'm calling it now, the integration. You reintegrate as a whole person among other whole people. And as you can see, your level of dissonance begins to diminish until the point where you live your life totally through sharing, through loving, through compassion and wisdom, and spiritually awake and aware. So this is rather a kind of lightning whistle-stop tour of these ideas, but I'm hoping that you kind of understand it already, and I'm just filling in the gaps. So transition between the stages involves the psychology of loss and renewal, the psychology of healing and growth, and therefore understood better in terms of emotional rather than cognitive development. Moving between stages often necessitates confronting adversity, such as ill health. I've had patients in the past who've said things like, "That was really awful what I went through, but I'm glad I did, because it's taught me so much about myself, about my real values, and about other people, and about how, other people are prepared to care for you and put themselves out for you and look after you. I used to be much more selfish. Now I want to give something back." Moving between stages involves a spectrum of emotional pain, as I was telling you, followed by healing and growth towards personal and spiritual maturity, which involves greater resilience, autonomy, spontaneity, joy, and contentment. Next one. So the next bit is about how you move between the trajectories. There's a slightly bigger version of that same picture. So this is the same diagram, except it's got these little steps up and down, and at each step there's an asterisk, and therefore something happens. And this is really just another way of helping people make sense of their life and growth and development. And in each case, the something is usually different. Obviously, there's some things that happen on this stage are things which put people off a spiritual worldview and increase the dissonance between their everyday ego and their spiritual selves, if you like. What would be an example? Well, it might be going to a religious school where the teachers are hateful and beat you all the time, or something like that. Maybe you all have stories. You lose your faith in some way, and are increasingly inclined to say, religion is bunk, and spirituality is bunk, God is dead, and all that sort of thing. I mean, it doesn't have to be quite like that. It doesn't have to be in these sort of jump steps. It can be gradual or whatever it is. But I'm just trying to fill out the picture of a model or a paradigm that can be useful. And similarly, people can make leaps forward, if you like, better. I've got one example ready to hand. One of my examples, a bit cheeky really, a chap called Barack Obama. Age 19, Barack attended a rally in California supporting the African National Congress of South Africa, a country still in the grip of apartheid before the release of Nelson Mandela. He wasn't expected to do anything except show people to their seats or something like that. It was a go-for, if you like. Asked to make a brief speech to fill in a bit of time, I think, he found himself unexpectedly inspired. Mounting the stage in a trance-like state, he reached the microphone and said, "There is a struggle going on. It's happening an ocean away, but it's a struggle that touches each and every one of us, whether we know it or not, whether we want it or not. A struggle that demands we choose sides, not between black and white, not between rich and poor. No, it's a harder choice than that. It's a choice between dignity and servitude, between fairness and injustice, between commitment and indifference, a choice between right and wrong." With these words, I'm saying, Obama was demonstrating an intuitive grasp of the non-separateness of humanity. He was also accurately depicting his own crisis and the choices he had still to make. Yet with friends the same day he tried to disown the speech. He was not yet ready to be a public figure. I've written a bit more about Barack Obama's spiritual development, but that's not relevant for the moment. Something happened to him, didn't it? Something happened. He can't explain it, and he was inspired. And we are all now affected by that, as he is such an influential and powerful man. But things happen, and they can. I'm sure that you will have your own stories. I've got a few too, of things that made a difference to us in realizing. I was going to read this out tomorrow, but I think I've got something that's relevant. Well, this isn't what I was going to read, but I'm going to read it anyway because it's good. This is Thomas Merton. This is relevant to the idea of a spiritual self, and it's Christian because Merton was, after all, a Christian monk. But it doesn't really have to be. If you don't like the word God in this passage, you can use the infinite or the absolute or anything really. At the center of our being is a point of nothingness, which is untouched by sin and by illusion, a point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God, from which God disposes of our lives, which is inaccessible to the fantasies of our own mind or the brutalities of our own will. This little point of nothingness is, so to speak, His name written in us. It is like a pure diamond, blazing with the invisible light of heaven. It is in everybody, and if we could see it, we would see these billions of points of light coming together in the face and blaze of a sun that would make all the darkness and cruelty of life vanish completely. So, making something happen. Can we make something happen? Well, we can probably make something happen in our own lives much more easily than we can make something happen in anybody else's. And one of them might be to adopt spiritual values: honesty, kindness, patience, perseverance, humility, generosity, wisdom, creativity, joy, hope, compassion, and love. We can engage in regular spiritual practices, and by that I mean any religious or secular commitment or activity that promotes spiritual development. More about this tomorrow. And we can work towards mastery of spiritual skills, which might involve looking for a teacher or joining a class. And we can develop spiritually supportive friendships. There's some copies of this at the back. I'm not quite sure why I've bothered to put it in here, but there are some tips in there as well. The version at the back is the rewrite. I wrote the original. This is, most of it, and this is the latest version. It's free, and you can download it from the Royal College of Psychiatrists website, or you can ring them up and ask them to send you a copy or several copies. I'm not sure whether to go on with spiritual practices, and let me just hang on. I'm just looking through my. I see. I can't make it move without having it on the screen. Okay. How's the time?
15 minutes.
Right. I'm just wondering about questions.
Nice to leave
Yeah.
time for questions.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just whiz through my. Well, I'll just briefly mention this. Can you teach spirituality? Well, yes. I taught a course to third-year medical students at Brighton and Sussex Medical School on spirituality and healthcare. And these were the learning objectives: to explore the question, what is spirituality, while clarifying overlap and distinction between spirituality and religion; to consider that spiritual awareness and practices may be advantageous to patients, also to practitioners; to consider harmful and hazardous aspects of spiritual and religious factors and practices; to substantiate these points with reference to epidemiological research; to offer explanations for the effects encountered according to 7, this is Jeff Levin's work, theosomatic principles, he calls them. Not a very good word, but there we are, theosomatic. To identify spiritual values and promote spiritual skills relevant to healthcare, to teach how to assess the religious and spiritual aspects of patients' lives, and to encourage and facilitate personal reflection on spirituality and healthcare in the light of the student-selected component experience. That's what this was about. It was students chose to come and learn about. I won't go through this. Another point, though, is that I've written up that program, and foolishly, I don't think I've given you the reference, but I can either give you the reference or actually on my computer somewhere I've got the paper, and I can load it to your memory stick, or I can email it to you if you want to know about teaching spirituality to medical students. And the next one was, assessing spirituality. Well, that was part of that, the teaching, telling medical students how to assess spirituality. Well, I found it was really easy. I said to these young enthusiasts that they should go and have a conversation with a patient, any patient they chose, whether it be a surgical, medical, obstetric, psychiatric, any kind of patient. Go and have a conversation and introduce into the conversation 2 types of question. Do you think of yourself as religious or spiritual in any way? And obviously, if they do think of themselves as religious or spiritual, then they should expand on that, say a bit more. Tell me how, tell me what. Do you go to church? What church? What? So on and so on. Secondly, what helps most when things go badly wrong, such as when you are ill? And this is for the people who, think religion is bunk and spirituality is bunk, but they still have something that helps them go badly wrong, such as when they are ill, and they either have inner sources of strength or courage or comfort, hope, or things that they do to give them strength and courage, etc., and or they have external supports from family, friends, a faith group possibly, or other network, their knitting circle, their book group, book club, whoever it is. And this question actually gets directly into a person's spiritual reality, if you think of that as whatever gives their life meaning and purpose at a deeply personal level. And what if they say, well, nothing. I have no inner sources of strength. I have no external supports. Well, bingo, you found the problem. You found the source of the problem. You need to work with that. And if you don't want to work with it, then you need to get the hospital chaplain to come along and have a chat. Okay, so these are on the. These are the references. Some of the references. This is the article. I did put the reference in, Teaching Spirituality, and. These are the books up at the back, 2 of them. I should mention that some of the books look as though they're written by somebody called Patrick Whiteside. Patrick Whiteside is me. I wrote some of those books under that name. And there's some more recommended reading there. But again, as you've got them on the list. My only final thought about this lecture was, not necessarily this lecture, but that there should be... it's not me to say so, but I would like to suggest that there might be a David Fontana Memorial Lecture, as David was a good friend to me and a wonderful man, as we've already heard. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, it's an opportunity just to mention, in relation to the last point you made, and you will have found in the conference pack a leaflet about a day event that is coming up in November, which is precisely a memorial for David Fontana in London.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that aside, thank you very much for that. And any questions? It's my prerogative to ask a question.
Okay, there is a hand up there as well.
Well, I'll ask the question first, okay?
Okay, yeah.
There was a slide a little while ago talking about something happening.
Oh, yes.
And the way I understand you is that these some things that happen are critical in the development of our spiritual life.
Okay.
And then you said, do we make these some things happening? And I would question a little about the subject of that. Who is the we? Who is it? I mean, the we, the I, or the
Well,
you.
at that point, it's a composite, isn't it? It's a composite we with an ego and a spirit, an everyday ego and a spiritual self, in a kind of, it's. This is the we. It's the we is when this is twanging, okay, and it's trying to get down to being a straight line again.
Right. I asked the question because
So it's an illusion. It's an illusion that there's two. It's actually one.
Right. Yeah.
Glad I brought this.
A question.
Not much good as a rubber band.
Yes.
Can I ask about your use of this word dissonance as the
Yes.
vertical axis of the graph, really?
Yeah.
Because it looks to me very like the weight of gravity that Anthony Hegarty was demonstrating, or our footprint on the Earth, or the package we carry, the weight of our egos.
Yes, well, I suppose another word for it, using a Buddhist word, would be dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, sometimes referred to as suffering. The word suffering is interesting to me, and I did write something about it in Love, Healing and Happiness, as having a number of meanings. Suffering we instantly equate with pain, emotional pain, physical pain, some kind of pain, existential angst or something. But actually, another meaning of it is just to experience. I went out into the garden and suffered the rays of the sun hitting my face or something like that. It's not commonly used that way. And then the third way is to permit or allow. Suffer little children to come unto me. Permit them to come unto me. And if you suffer suffering in that sense, if you allow your pain, it will heal. It will be the medicine. The pain is the medicine. It will heal you and help you to grow.
I actually had two questions. The first one is related to how the stages that you represent with spiritual growth, how linearly progressive do you think?
Oh no! It's like a symphony, and it's like waves of the ocean. This is just a very simple diagram of a very complex idea in a way that it's like a map, a very, very simple map to help, look, here's London and here's Yorkshire, and here's Wales, and that's about all it's got on it, it hasn't got all the towns and streets and rivers and hills and in between. But it has got some, I think, these are the critical landmarks. There's so much that goes on, the news or something, seems to me to reflect this conflict between the conformists, and the possessive people, with the more liberal-minded, we're cooperative rather than competitive people. It seems to me it was a sort of moment of oh great, when I recognized for myself that there were these two drives that do actually really compete quite strenuously and dominate some people, and one drive dominates some people and the other drive dominates other people, and you see it playing out all the time. And the trick is, when you're the more mature, is actually to like Gandhi, non-violence. Don't fight. Fighting for peace. Fighting in the interest of peace is like making love in the interest of virginity. I've sanitized that slightly. Was that two questions?
No, that was my first question. But yeah.
Okay.
What you said reminded me a lot of similar of some similar stages I've seen in psychosynthesis. And your explanations seem to go actually along similar lines, so I find that quite interesting. The other question was I was really interested in the fact that you taught a module.
Is your microphone on? Because I can't hear you very well.
It's kind of strange to be talking to one. I find it quite interesting that you taught a module on spirituality to medical students.
Yes.
And I was wondering if that was an elective module or was it something...
It was what's called an SSC, a student-selected component. Brighton and Sussex Medical School opened up for business in 2005 or something like that. And so the first group of third years came through in 2007. They all have in that year to do 4 of these SSCs, which are 8 weeks, half a day per week. And they have to choose 4 out of about 50. And those of us who offered them were invited. Anyone could offer them on anything, and I chose to offer one on spirituality and healthcare. And well, if you ever read the paper I wrote, it was quite well attended. I ran it 4 times. I didn't have to run it 4 times a year. I ran it twice a year. Actually, I had no time in my timetable to do it, so I just had to fit it in, And I ran it twice a year for 2 years, just before I retired from the health service. And I really loved doing it. It was great fun. It was a bit hard work, but it was really enjoyable. It was a wonderful experience with the kids. One of the, I said kids, they weren't that young, but one of them went off to interview a woman. Just ask those 2 questions. Are you spiritual or religious, and how and where do you get your inner strength from? And she came back. And the following week, they have to tell the group what they'd been through, what the experience had been. And she came back and she said, "I've been a medical student for 3 years, and that's the first time I've actually felt I've helped somebody, just by opening up that topic." I don't think I answered the question, but it doesn't matter.
Any further questions? Yes.
I don't know. Well, I was, ashamed to admit, a little suspicious of you, you see, when I read your...
Why did you buy me a whiskey then?
Wait a minute. When I read your bio in the preliminary programme, and I thought, oh my God, a psychiatrist now. This is going to be interesting. But I'm very...
Not your normal psychiatrist.
No, I'm very refreshed. Okay, all right. That's even worse, I don't know, retired people. But no, I'm very refreshed to hear what you've been saying. And I just wondered, you put this in as a student-selective module, was that the expression?
Yeah.
And it just disturbs me. What does one have to do, though, to convince the medical profession, of which I include, the conventional psychiatrist, who's medically trained, to convince them that some aspect of psychology or spirituality is actually quite important? Uh-huh. And if I can just share with you a very quick anecdote. I had... a father of a family who'd lost their son, who'd committed suicide. There's an awful lot of high male suicide in Ireland, and I was kind of counselling this family, well, particularly the father. And the son was 24 when he died, and he'd suffered with depression for a long, long time. And as the family became more financially better off, they were both teachers, is how they came to me, and they got promotion and they got some more money, and they took him from the local psychiatrist in a small rural town in Ireland to a new guy in Dublin who was much flashier. And the mother went with him, though he was quite old, and wanted to make sure that the new psychiatrist had got a note from the file which talked about his abuse by a music teacher when he was, I don't know, young teenager. And the psychiatrist's comment, which the father told me, and I know it's second hand, but it struck home, particularly in Ireland at the time. Now, come along, let's get his medication right, and we'll talk about this later. And they never, ever did. And, I mean, that's just... Now, even personally, I had a very, very serious heart attack in the past, and I just dropped dead in the street one day. And I couldn't get my heart going again, and I was put into a coma for a week. I come round in hospital. I'm highly disturbed. It's not surprising. I've had a kind of week and a bit. Just, I don't know what's happened. And here I am complaining about the porridge, and the chief registrar is saying, "You're very lucky to be here. Why are you giving us so much trouble?" And I said, I hate hospitals. I had a terrible experience when I was 3 in a hospital. Well, what was it he said? The solution to this was total immersion is what you need. I couldn't get a psychological response out of these people, let alone a spiritual one. So, and later, you know, when I went, I was much better, and I was going for kind of checkups, you know, and I said to the consultant, you know, I said, "I'm very well," but, you know, I said, "The problem is now that I go through life every day waiting to drop dead. There's a kind of a psychological worry there that I haven't ever talked about this or got this out. We just haven't time to deal with those kind of things. Unless I just wondered from your perspective, how can you be? Is there any way this is ever going to change?"
Can I call time now? Well, I'm hopeful, but I don't think, you know, it's like that wonderful story about the Irish. You know, the American tourists in their hire car pull up beside an Irishman standing by the road, and they say, "Can you tell us the way to Dublin?" And he says, "Well, if you really want to go to Dublin," he said, "I wouldn't start from here." So if you want to change the medical profession, I wouldn't necessarily start from here. It's a big question, and I have some thoughts, but I think perhaps we're running out of time now, and perhaps we can talk about it over a beer sometime.
Sounds like you are saved by the bell there.
Yeah, I didn't ring my bell. This is my. You'll hear this tomorrow, but I'll give you a. Minute's silence for David.
Thank you again. And maybe it is an opportune moment, actually, to mention, because it is connected, another leaflet in the conference pack about a conference which is coming up in November. This one is in Liverpool, on psychosis and spirituality. And just to mention the subtitle of that conference, which I think relates here, is Inner Journeys at a Time of Transition. And the time of transition, I think, is both the age that we're living in, where we can have a presentation like this, but also in terms of individuals, that individuals are going through transitions and the kind of journeys that people make as part of those transitions. So that's a conference that you may be interested in. It's connected with a book written by someone who's a member of this section, Isabel Clarke, some of you will know. So again, thank you very much.